Welcome to Gutsy Talks. I'm Rachel Larson, your host, naturopath and nutritionist, and I'm here to have real, honest conversations that can help you heal your gut, calm your mind, and fall back in love with food. Together with leading health experts, we'll dive into all things gut health and explore the deep connections between your gut and overall well-being, so you can feel empowered to take control of your health and live your best life. If you love all things gut health, follow me for more on Instagram at rachel.larson or head to rachellarson.com.au. Now, let's get into today's episode. Today we are joined by Elly McLean, a holistic nutritionist, mother, marathon runner and yogi on a mission to make evidence-based health the priority in fat loss. Not for aesthetics, but to prevent Australia's biggest killers. Elly helps women achieve their health and body composition goals through consultation, testing and custom meal plans, tackling gut health, hormone stress and training nutrition. So really, guys, if you're ready for a science-backed episode today full of strategies to fuel your body and feel your best, then this episode is for you. So big welcome to Elly.
Hi, Rachel. Thanks for having me.
Very excited for this conversation. I don't think there's ever a day where someone's not out there thinking about their metabolism and their weight and how they lose it and how they, it's just a constant for many people. So to really dive into this with you, which is your niche, is exciting.
Yeah.
And I've got a bunch of questions that I'm ready to throw at you. And before I do that, I do want to hear about, what it is in terms of your journey that led you to this be your focus.
Yeah. Well, like most practitioners, there's probably multiple points that have brought me here. Unlike a lot of practitioners who tend to, go in the direction of where their health has led them, I haven't had to necessarily lose significant amounts of weight in my life, but I've just been significantly influenced by certain points in my life. I remember as a teenager watching the footy players out on our school oval thinking like, I wonder if Chris Judd ate something different for lunch today, if he would be able to jump higher or run faster.
Yeah.
He went to school with me. And I, saw my mother who was constantly on a diet, from one to the next, yo-yoing. And I think at the time I was like, why can't mum just lose weight and keep it off? And now as I get older and a new mother myself, I think, well, mum just didn't have the support that she needed. She worked full time. She had 3 children. She just needed to be on a diet, get the weight off, but she never had the right mindset around nutrition. So those two things really conditioned me very young to want to go and study nutrition straight out of school.
Yeah.
And I always thought I would be a sports nutritionist and I do still do a lot of sports nutrition. And obviously that's given me a lot of the background into metabolic health. But I'm here today focusing more on body composition and metabolic health, and specifically sports nutrition and metabolic health. So it still forms a lot of my practice. In university, I went the other way. As opposed to having to lose weight, I probably got quite obsessed with being a certain weight, thinking, oddly, as a nutritionist, well, I should be able to nail calories and macros, and I should be my leanest because that's what a good nutritionist should be. So university actually probably was one of the times in my life where I've had the worst relationship with food, because we spent so much time learning about calorie content and tracking and diaries, and it set me down quite a negative path when it comes to nutrition, and quite an obsessive path. So I also come to my clients with that knowledge and understanding of, well, I don't want to send people down the obsessive path and lead them to think that they need to be as lean as they can possibly be to be healthy or the best version of themselves. So I guess that's the culmination of my experience that's brought me here to now working with women specifically on metabolic health. People don't tend to understand that term, so I'm sure we'll get to that today, and body compositional change. And I did spend a lot of my earlier career focusing on sports nutrition and gut health, because I've had a lot of my own gut health challenges and hypothalamic amenorrhea, because guess what? I had hypothalamic amenorrhea after university. But my clients, I guess, have conditioned me to want to learn more and more about how to achieve a healthy weight realistically, holistically, and sustainably. And so that's, they have guided my further education and learning to to be where I am today.
Well, I mean, everyone's got their story. And like you said, it doesn't have to be you talking about weight loss, but there is clearly influence and inspiration in your life that has led you to this point. And we're of similar age, and I can think about even just like the things that we were bombarded with when we were younger, like the magazines about being skinny, the Weight Watchers, and all of those, the Atkins diet, all those things in terms of that. So, like, just kind of referencing your mother again, like, there's a lot of crap that we had to actually listen and like absorb in terms of what it meant to be healthy. And also, I can relate to you in terms of being a practitioner of health. There's this sense of, oh, well, I have to be the pinnacle of
Yes.
health. I've got to be like the gold standard of health. And like, hey, we're all human, like that's not how it works. So I can relate, and I'm so sure that everyone else listening can just be like, yeah, I know where she's coming from. And so that is literally my next question when you said people don't know what metabolic health is. So let's get that cleared up. What's metabolic health?
Good question. Doesn't necessarily lead to a short and snappy answer, but the short and snappy version
Hmm.
is that our metabolism is essentially what takes the energy in the food that we consume and process it and manage it for utilization or storage. That's the simplest way of putting it.
Yep.
But a lot of people have their own versions and understanding of it. I was speaking to a friend at a party not too long ago, and she's well educated. She's a copywriter, and she's like, "But what is metabolic health if that's what you specialize?"
Yeah. Yep.
And I was like, "Well, what do you think it is?" She's like,
Yeah.
"Well, I just think of like digestion and what happens in your gut." And I was like, "Well, yeah, I guess we break down food in our gut, and that's the first process in metabolism is starting to absorb those macro and micronutrients that then go on to get utilized, but maybe also a result of the 90s when we were told to eat every 2 or 3 hours to fuel our metabolism and stoke the
Yeah.
fire and not get hungry and keep our stomach full. And I wonder if that's part of what drove her thought process. So I wonder how many other people listening are thinking of metabolism as being like how quickly you digest things.
Yeah. Yeah, because people reference fast or slow metabolism. Like I've got a fast or I've got a slow metabolism. And I don't even think people know what it means, whether it means that like how often they poo or how often they get hungry or
Whether they're skinny or they're fat,
how lean they are. Yeah, yeah. Like
whether
it's
they
a
find it
really,
easy to stay skinny or fat.
yeah.
Yeah. And I can break that down.
Mm,
I think firstly with metabolic health, yeah, it's this, I guess, ideal scenario of being able to utilize energy. And I use this term a lot of metabolic efficiency. So
mm,
come to the fast or slow metabolism in a second.
yep.
Um, but an efficient metabolism is more the term we want to throw around now when we're thinking about good metabolic health. So if we think
Yes.
of in the 90s, we grew up thinking that we want a fast metabolism as opposed to a slow metabolism. Now I want people to realize that they want an efficient metabolism as opposed to an inefficient
Yep.
metabolism.
Yep.
If we think of our primary fuel sources, they are carbohydrate and fat. So people might know that they're also two of our macronutrients. The third macronutrient is protein. They are all our energy sources. However, our body doesn't really like to use protein as an energy source. If we think of these energy sources as like wood, I had someone once describe that burning protein for energy would be like taking the wood in the structure of our home and putting that on the fire. Like you could
Yeah.
burn the wood, but it would really be quite detrimental to burn
Yep.
the wood. Our
Yep.
body is going to preserve protein as best it possibly can. So then we're left with carbohydrate and fat as a fuel source. An efficient metabolism is one that can really easily and flexibly burn both of those fuels. It's never going to be burning one of those fuels in isolation. It's always going to be a combination of the two, but we want it to be the ability to access the two
Mm,
evenly.
mm.
An inefficient metabolism is one that's really stuck in this carbohydrate burning mode. So fat is, left to stay in its storage
Stay. Yeah.
place.
Yep.
Yep. Stay in adipose tissue, and fat that's consumed gets put into adipose tissue while the body preferentially utilizes carbohydrate as a fuel source.
Mm.
We can't store carbohydrate limitlessly. So we have quite limited ability to store carbohydrate both in our muscle and our liver.
Mhm.
Um, so therefore, if we are consuming carbohydrate, we're burning through it really quickly, we're not storing a ton of it, it promotes us to want to keep eating more of it. And so
Yeah.
this is where one of the signs of an inefficient, inflexible metabolism is constant hunger. So the need to eat every 2 or 3 hours.
Which people may have thought this is a fast
Fast
metabolism where you're
metabolism.
thinking, oh, this is great. Like I'm so hungry, I must be burning fuel. And I need more. Whereas it's actually potentially a sign of an inefficient
Yeah,
metabolism.
exactly. You're not able to tap into this slower, more steady burning fuel source, which is fat, and
Mm,
more you're relying on this easy to reach, quick to access fuel source that we can't store a ton of. So
yeah.
you keep replenishing to keep your energy levels up.
Mm.
Mm.
I love that. Like, sorry to cut you off, but like, I feel like that's going to be a light bulb moment for a lot of people is not only changing the words that they use to describe their metabolism, but also like questioning these really archaic and outdated ways that we think of our metabolism. The word, like it's not fast. Like even me, I'm like, wow, that's just made so much sense. Like the pennies dropped for me as well.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, when, and we'll probably get around to this again today,
Mm.
but when significantly restrictive diets were in vogue,
Yep. Yes.
stick to the 1,200 calories a day or less to lose your weight.
Mm.
Um, when they were low fat diets and high carbohydrate diets, people were encouraged to eat every 2 or 3 hours just so they didn't get hungry and chew their arm off, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, these symptoms of constantly needing to eat, getting hangry if you don't eat. Do we know what hangry means? When you're hungry and angry and we
Yeah.
get hungry,
Yeah.
these are some of the really early signs of poor metabolic health. And
Mm.
if you're storing weight and not losing body fat, that's another sign of poor metabolic health.
Yeah.
And then, of course, there is more. There's things like adult acne. There's some hormonal conditions like PCOS. There is changes in mood, so like irritability, there's low
Mhm.
energy levels or ups and downs in energy levels, fat deposition. So I said inability to burn fat, but also if you find that the fat is predominantly around the middle or starting to store around the back, like where the bra strap is, these are signs of poor metabolic health. And then we can delve more deeply into pathology. So we can do blood testing to also understand the state of one's metabolic health.
Yeah. And
Do you want
so,
me to go there or do
yeah,
we?
no, that's exactly where I want us to go. So, like, there's a ton of symptoms that you've just mentioned, which, people might be just thinking about, how many of those do I check? I think a lot of us can probably relate. So, I would say that there's a lot of us in society that don't understand our metabolic health and our food systems aren't necessarily primed to support great metabolic efficiency. So if you're like, I think I have an issue, what kind of testing is available? How do people start getting some answers?
Mm, and testing's really important. It's not always
Mm,
the first thing that you have to do, but
yeah,
I guess in my case, people come to see me because typically the dietary changes that they've made aren't really working for them.
yeah.
Maybe they're in their 40s or late 30s and they're, employing the diet that they did in their 20s or early 30s and they're not seeing weight loss change. This is a big sign that we need to look at a little more deeply and look under the hood and see what's going
Mm,
on for that person and why they don't respond quickly to just a calorie restriction or whatever diet that they did in their 20s. Usually it's quite a significant calorie restriction.
yeah,
Blood testing that we do is not necessarily what a GP would run. I just highlight that because I don't want people listening to this going to their GP, asking for these bloods, and then being surprised when their doctor's not been overly forthcoming with
yeah.
running the tests. The key thing to keep in mind is that tests I would do to look at metabolic status or metabolic health is not to diagnose type 2
Yeah.
diabetes or necessarily to diagnose PCOS or fatty liver disease or high cholesterol levels. It's more to look at what's the story. So if we've
Mm,
got a number of suboptimal results here that don't necessarily indicate a diagnosis is necessary, but if we've got a story of multiple suboptimal results, then that's where I can see, okay, well, there's some indicators here that metabolism isn't quite working the way we need it to, and we have to reverse this in order to support that person's ability to respond to a calorie deficit and to get them
yeah.
losing body fat. So we'd be looking at a lipid panel, in particular triglyceride levels. Triglycerides are a type of fat in the blood. We want them less than 1, but when they're elevated, it's an indicator that fats aren't being burned efficiently. So lipid panel, there's other measures on there, but primarily for markers of metabolic health and function, I'm looking at triglycerides. We then want to also look at relatively easy to access measures of blood sugar control, so fasting blood glucose, HbA1c or glycated hemoglobin, and a fasting insulin.
Mhm.
Now, those first two tests are relatively easy to access. A fasting insulin is not that easy to access
Not so
for
much.
Medicare.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's
And
not an expensive test.
I think it's worth saying, like, often, when we're talking about a collaborative approach, and I think having a GP on your team is very important, but they are held to a different set of rules because they're under Medicare. And that's kind of, I guess, the biggest reason why, they may not appear forthcoming is because they're held to account, they're audited. So it's not to be like my GP doesn't care. It can often be that, like, until they get certain markers to test further, they can't. What you're saying, though, is that, you can pay things out of pocket. Obviously, you want to be working someone such as yourself to know what to test and obviously then how to interpret it. But like there are ways around it. So I think that's just to be very clear. We're not like GPs are hopeless. It's just that they're held, they've got Medicare breathing down their back. So
Yeah,
they
yeah.
have got to work with that.
They do, and then, like I said, they use pathology differently to how
Yes.
a nutritionist or naturopath would. They're really keeping an eye out for ultimately, like, is there a diagnosis that's necessary?
Yeah.
Do we need to intervene with medicine? They're not necessarily looking at the subtleties of suboptimal
Mm,
results.
mm.
Again, in the case of fasting insulin, for example, it's not routinely done because GPs, they just don't look at that and think, oh, okay, well, a suboptimal fasting insulin with a normal fasting blood glucose means that I need to intervene with metformin. It's just
Yeah.
not the case.
Yeah.
And I like to help my clients understand that by the time their fasting blood glucose is elevated or the HbA1c is elevated to a pre-diabetic or a type 2 diabetic state, an HbA1c of 6.5 is considered type 2 diabetes,
Mm,
pre-diabetes being before we get to 6.5.
mm.
That's almost too late. We need to intervene when the insulin is starting to rise rather than intervene when the blood sugars have already risen.
So you're getting signs, beforehand.
Exactly. It's the early warning sign.
And that is exactly what we want to be doing in this holistic space is we're looking at preventative health. So we're not waiting until we've got the stamp of a diagnosis to act, but also recognizing exactly what you've said is that we don't need a diagnosis for things not to be working properly. And the same goes for, I just am like exactly the same in gut health. I'm not waiting for someone to be diagnosed with inflammatory bowel disease or diverticulitis or something like that for there to potentially be some room to help support, improve, for there to be an issue or dysfunction there. So, like, those same principles apply. And I think that's important for people to be like, you don't have to have a label for there to be room for improvement.
No, no,
Yeah.
definitely not. And in the case of insulin, it's quite easy for a suboptimal result to really impact that person's experience of weight loss and trying to achieve weight loss. So there's some evidence to show that even a fasting insulin greater than 8
Mm.
could hold somebody back from burning fat effectively.
And the
And
reference range is a lot larger than that, isn't it?
a lot larger. So it depends on the lab as to what the reference range is. And I have my preferred labs in Victoria that I use for fasting insulin because it is quite a sensitive test. So if anyone in Victoria, I prefer to use Melbourne pathology as
Yep.
best possible for fasting insulin. If we don't use Melbourne pathology, then at least I want to continue using the other lab that we're
Yeah.
using. It's always
Continuity.
yep, then
Yeah.
we can compare apples with apples. But yeah, the ideal range would be 3 to 8. In some cases of PCOS, it might be even a tighter range of about 3 to 7 or 3 to 6. That's because the ovaries can be far more sensitive to insulin. So
Mm.
insulin greater than 6 or 7 might be impacting the ovaries and testosterone production. But yeah, outside of PCOS, an insulin greater than 8 is what I would consider to be suboptimal and needs addressing. And
Mm.
certainly indicative of poor metabolic health. But I often see numbers that are much higher than an 8. So it's very common for levels to be higher than an 8.
Yeah.
Other measures that I'm using in pathology would be things like a liver function test, where I'm zoning in on, in particular, ALT and AST. Typically, a raised ALT is a sign that I'm looking for that there's metabolic issues going on. What else would I be looking at outside of the bloods? Things like blood pressure, waist circumference, would be the other indicators of poor
Mm.
metabolic health.
Yeah, and the weight circumference is like a really great and easy one for people to, I guess, track and even like do themselves. So, I think like from what you've said, it's very clear that there's lots of ways that we can assess and understand metabolic health. And as you said, tell a story, get the full picture. So,
Mm.
when we're talking about, I guess, the underlying causes or root causes for inefficient metabolic system or metabolism, is it purely diet? Is there other drivers? Like when people are like, yeah, but what's actually causing it? Is it just how we eat? That's the problem?
Mm. No, there are other factors. Certainly, overnutrition, excess nutrition, calorie excess will all be impacting
Hmm.
metabolic health, but it's not the only thing that impacts. So those things impact because, yes, if there is overnutrition and then fat storage and poor blood sugar control, it will certainly impact metabolic health. But then physical activity is going to have a huge impact on one's metabolic health, because if we're not physically active or doing the right physical activity, then there'll be muscle wastage,
Mm,
sarcopenia, and muscle mass is so metabolically active. Fat mass is a little bit, but muscle mass is really the metabolically active tissue in our body. And from the age of 30, and it gets worse as we are older, but from the age of 30, muscle mass is on the decline.
yeah.
So we really have to be proactive about the exercise that we do and the nutrition that supports muscle mass to ensure that we don't lose muscle mass. And this is where you can have like those skinny fat people who
Yeah.
maybe don't from the outside look like they might have a metabolic issue because they're not
They're
overweight.
skinny. Yeah. Yep. Yep.
Yeah, but on the inside, they might be losing muscle mass, so losing that metabolically active tissue. They might be building visceral fat, more fat in and around the organs, and therefore still have a metabolic health issue, even though they don't look
Mm,
like the typical case that we would expect. Typically society would say, oh, we expect someone to
yeah.
be overweight to have metabolic health issues.
Yep.
Certainly, it's the food environment that we are exposed to these days where we're just not at risk of undernutrition, if anything.
Ever. Yes.
Overnutrition,
Yeah.
highly palatable foods. It's exercise, eating like an athlete, but training like an office worker. The average office worker takes about 3,000 steps a day. We don't have to be working towards that 10,000 steps a day that the World Health Organization sort of plucked out of air. Not a
Yep.
bad number, but it's not the only number.
Yep.
But certainly we have to be working to reverse this state of inactivity that we are on
That,
generally in.
yep. Modern day. And talking about exercise, so the difference between, I guess, incidental versus more that cardio, like going for a run versus like weights and resistance training and building muscle. Um, like I guess if someone, what would give someone the biggest impact if they're like, I really want to take a hold of my metabolic health. I want to increase efficiency. I really want to start that journey. Like, is it a combination or is there one that you would prefer over the other for people to, I guess, preference?
Yeah, it's actually a combination.
Mm.
Um, the starting point is just anything.
Yep. Moving's good.
If the average office worker is only doing 3,000 steps a day, then the starting point is really just anything. Like whatever you can do to be sitting less and moving more is a good thing. Even if it means sitting in your chair and moving more from your chair, that's a good thing. I'll explain why. Before I touched on what a fast metabolism might be, like where people might be getting this term fast metabolism
Hmm.
from. And I want to tie this back into exercise
Yep.
by explaining what TDEE is. So TDEE is our total daily energy expenditure, right?
Yep.
That is the amount of energy that we expend in a day. And it's broken down into four main categories. The first category is our basal metabolic rate. So this is what it costs. If we were to think of financial currency, our basal metabolic rate is what it costs to keep the lights on, just to keep our
Just to be alive. This is what we need, kind of
just to
thing.
be alive, keep our organs ticking over, keep us sitting upright. This is our basal metabolic rate. And this is about 50 to 70% of our total daily energy expenditure. So it definitely forms the bulk. I think for people who have used that term fast metabolism, maybe they could be better corrected or forgiven for using that term if they were referring to having a high basal metabolic rate.
Yes.
Yeah. And there are things that we can do to feed this basal metabolic rate. So, for example, if you have more muscle, then you're going to have a higher basal metabolic rate. So, you're going to burn more energy at rest, right? So, if you've got more muscle than the person sitting next to you and you're both flopped on a couch, you with the more muscle is going to burn more energy than the person sitting next to you.
Yep.
So that, like, maybe that's the fast metabolism that some people are referring to, but it's certainly a good thing to have a higher basal metabolic rate.
Mm-hmm. And so muscle building, I guess, in maintaining muscle. Yeah, sorry, you're probably going to get into that, but that seems to
Exactly.
be exactly why we need to do
Yes.
it.
Yeah, exactly. So one of the other contributors to our total daily energy expenditure is physical activity, and this is planned physical activity. So the benefits of doing physical activity are not only to increase your total daily energy expenditure, but depending on the type of exercise that you do, you may then have a flow-on effect to your basal metabolic rate. So the way that I explain it to
Yeah.
clients is that we want to be doing the resistance exercise because we want to increase our energy expenditure, but really that's like putting money in the high interest account, or in this day
Yeah.
and age, the crypto account, right?
Yeah.
So investing in resistance exercise not only means you're going to be burning more fuel for that 60 minutes that you're training and increasing your TDEE, but you're also going to be feeding back into that basal metabolic rate by building the muscle that is then going to mean that for the rest of the day, you are burning more energy, or for the week, you are burning more energy. The other exercise, like the aerobic conditioning exercise that you would do, which is all relative to you, whether it's walking, jogging, cycling, swimming, and where you're at, that's going to be increasing your total daily energy expenditure just through that physical activity and the actual, I guess, calories that you burn in that moment and as you're recovering.
Yeah.
So both types of exercise are really important for different reasons. And it goes even beyond what I've just talked about. Like if you're talking about longevity, then
Yeah.
you're getting even more specific about the type of training that you do. So the type of resistance exercise that you do, the type of cardio exercise that you do, the intensities, the frequency, that sort of thing. But for most people listening, if we just break it down into doing resistance training and aerobic training, ideally you would be lifting challenging weights. That's challenging for you, not what's challenging for your buddy or your next door neighbor.
Yes, it's all relative.
It's all relative, yes. And ideally you'd be lifting those challenging weights 2 or 3 or 4 times a week. And then you'd be doing aerobic exercise, ideally 3 or 4 times a week, whether that's a walk or increasing the intensity or changing it up, depending on where you're at and what your goals are.
Yeah.
The other contributors to our total daily energy expenditure, so as not to leave you hanging, the thermic effective food. The thermic effective food actually accounts for anywhere between 5 and 10% of our daily energy expenditure. And this is the energy that's required to take the energy from the food that we eat and convert it to an energy that is usable for our body.
It's kind of like what I guess, to simplify it, our digestive system kind of needs, like all those processes to go from, like, I guess, food we eat to then ta-da, it's in our bloodstream and doing other things. Is that kind of takes like 5 to 10%? Yeah, cool.
Yeah. The way that I tend to explain it is that if you had a car that's going to be burning petroleum, to make it go, you also have a battery in that car that helps you to burn that petroleum. So,
Mm.
we obviously don't require as much energy to get the fuel as we get from the food source, if
Yep.
that makes sense.
Yep.
But certainly it requires energy to get energy from our food. So if we're looking at our different macronutrients, the thermic effect of protein is much higher than the thermic effect of carbohydrate, which is also much higher than the thermic effect of fat. So, in theory, if you have a higher protein diet relative to fat and carbohydrate, then you're going to increase your daily energy expenditure ever so slightly by
Yep.
increasing the thermic effect of food.
Yep.
That's one of the benefits of a high protein diet when you have a goal of weight loss. Just one.
And it doesn't mean for anyone hearing that Ellie's saying everyone have protein powder 5 times a day. Like, we can do this. There are other ways to get protein, and obviously that's where we have to individualize our diet. And I know that that's exactly what you do in clinic is individualizing diets and making it sustainable and making it yummy and all those types of things. But yeah, it's amazing to see how we can, I say manipulate, but manipulate sounds bad, but like just modify our food to get those extra benefits. And there's a lot of talk about protein in the way that it's like also can help regulate or I guess reduce those glucose spikes, which, all feeds into exactly what we're talking about is, you know, everything just kind of working in a bit more sync with each other. You've mentioned obviously the gut a few times, but I just wanted to touch on, I guess, given, that's my love. So, what is, I guess, the link between our metabolic health and our gut? I guess we've kind of said a few things, but are they kind of feeding and talking to each other? Like what is the link?
Yeah. There are a couple of links. And can I just round out the daily
Oh
energy?
yeah, sorry, I
So I'm
got
not going to
excited.
freak
Of
out
course
if
you
people
can.
think that they've missed one.
Yeah,
Um,
I got excited. Sorry.
the final one is NEAT or non-exercise activity thermogenesis. So this is the amount of energy that we expend through
Mm,
the stuff that we're not really consciously aware of. So I move my hands a lot when I'm talking and excited. Some people tap their feet, tap their fingers.
mm.
That is the subconscious movement that we do, which actually contributes to quite a bit of energy expenditure. So yeah, that's the fourth and final. In terms of gut health, there's some really interesting research feeding into the link between gut health, metabolic health, and body composition. Even you're probably aware of the mice studies and even some human studies looking at fecal microbial transplants and how if we take the poop from a healthy weight human or mouse and transplant that to an overweight human or mouse, then
Just to be clear, human to human, mouse to mouse.
oh sorry, yes.
No, I mean I got what you were saying, but like let's make that crystal clear.
Thank you. Thank you. Wouldn't want to get that incorrect and leave people thinking they were getting mouse poo insertions.
Yeah, that'd be wild.
Yes, certainly like creature to like creature. And witnessing, what happens to body composition after that transplant.
Yeah.
So I haven't looked deeply enough into that to know whether there is purely like a psychosomatic component to that, or if it's physical, maybe a combination of the two. But regardless, we know that there is therefore a
There's something.
connection
Yeah.
between the gut and body composition. And I think there's likely a combination of
Yeah.
connections. You being the gut health expert, may be able to clarify these, but one would be the actual bacteria that are in our gut microbiome, and looking at the ratio of Firmicutes to Bacteroidetes. There's some indication to suggest that if you've got a higher ratio of Firmicutes, then that might lead you to being more predisposed to weight gain,
Yep.
inability to lose weight, maybe because those types of bacteria can extract more energy from the food
Mm.
you eat, leading to excess energy and more fat storage. Maybe it impacts appetite control and satiety cues. That could be a big connection between the bacteria that are in our gut and predisposition to weight gain.
Yeah. And that's what I'm familiar with as well. And I do think about that, just how, we as humans, like we were alive in an age where there was more food scarcity than what, there is now. So I actually think historically, having those ratios was probably helpful to our survival in that there's more efficiency and that it does change our satiety cues and all that kind of stuff. Like
Mm.
we're saying, there is no shortage of food. So it feels like it's an issue because of the day and age that we live in. But I think to some degree, it was probably a very good thing. And that's what I tell myself because I've tested myself and I have a high firmicutes, ratio. So
Yeah.
I think maybe I was just born in the wrong, I don't know, century or something
You
like
just need to
that.
go and be a hunter-gatherer.
Yeah, exactly.
I'll never forget, I don't, it must have been like 8 or so years ago, listening to ATP Science podcast. Those guys are hilarious, but one of them was like, firmicutes, not firm and cute. And like that will always stick with me. And whenever I tell a client, they have a little giggle. Um, and they just
Yeah.
hate the firmicutes then. They want to get that balance in order.
Yeah, exactly.
They're
Yeah,
like,
that's
how do I
so
do
funny.
it?
That's so funny. That's a great way of thinking of it as well, because you hear these bacterial names and it just kind of feels like we're literally speaking a different language,
Oh, I
in a
know.
way. So that's a nice short. And you've given like a lot of great tips and analogies. We've mentioned cars, we've mentioned crypto, like we've got all the different things.
All
Like
covered. Yeah. And I can probably tie them all back to some of the toys in my daughter's toy collection.
always,
Use
there's
those.
always connections.
Yeah, coins. There are other connections, though, possibly between gut health, because these are some that I do explore with my clients. One of those would be increased intestinal permeability or leaky gut, as
Hmm.
people may more commonly refer to it as, but potentially that, I guess, leakage of toxins into the system, or LPS, which we can test for in stool analysis, as you and some of your listeners may be aware, but that could, through leaking into the bloodstream, trigger inflammation and therefore impact metabolic health. Certainly, any form of inflammation is really going to impact our metabolism. And one of the blood tests that I would also commonly run is CRP, C-reactive protein. I'd also throw in there ESR just to look at inflammation and
Yeah.
what's going on. And then the other one is short chain fatty acid production. So the potential for the short chain fatty acids, which are the byproduct of gut bacterial fermenting fiber or prebiotics, may impact how much fat we store or burn for energy.
Yeah. So again, many links. And I guess that's where we're needing holistic approaches because we can't, like multiple tests may be required, but I guess it's just important to highlight that like things are always talking to each other. There's constantly, links in our body.
Exactly. We're
Um,
more microbial cells than we are human cells. So we have to acknowledge that those gut microbes are having an
Mate,
influence.
preaching to the choir. I love them. Like I'm
Yeah.
like everybody. Look, we need to look after our bugs. They do so much for us, in more ways than we still even know. Like it's exciting to have that still be, a field of research. And I'm sure in the future we're going to have more links between our gut and our metabolic health and different conditions and dysfunctions
Absolutely.
to come. So it's a constant watch this space.
It's
So I
such an
guess.
evolving area.
Yeah, it is. So, on a practical note for people, like, I guess just to be really clear, are there things that people are doing with their diet that are hurting their metabolic health? It may seem like we've covered it, but just to be really clear, what are some things that we are doing that dietary wise that are hurting our metabolic efficiency?
Mm. First and foremostly, and I hate to sound old school about this,
Hmm.
is excess nutrition.
Yeah,
So eating more energy than we require. And it doesn't always mean that, you're gluttonous. People can just, with all good intentions, not
yeah,
realize that they are consuming more energy than their body needs or can handle at
yeah.
any one time, right? So I often do recommend to my new clients that they diarize even for a short period of time, not necessarily in like a calorie counting
Yeah.
app, even if it's on a piece of paper or an Excel spreadsheet that I can see, but get really familiar with what's coming in and in what portion
And
sizes.
I think that's just more like an awareness
An
activity.
awareness factor. Yes.
Yeah,
It's not
absolutely.
about creating obsessive habits around food. This is just awareness factor. If you were working with a business coach or a financial advisor, they'd be like, well, what money is coming in? Like, do
Yeah.
you know where your money is coming in and do you know where your money is going? We
Mm.
wouldn't call tracking that an obsessive trait. It would just be awareness of
Yes.
where's our money coming from?
Yeah.
Especially if you are an entrepreneur and you don't just get one paycheck and you've got money coming from
Yeah. No.
you want to know what's coming in.
Yeah.
It's the same with nutrition. We need to get really clear about what is coming in. And we're actually working against factors that aren't even in our control, like the fact that food labels are legally allowed to be 20% out. So if you're looking at the calorie
Oh
content of a food
gosh.
and it says there's 100 calories per serve, it could be 80 calories or it could be 120 calories. So we're always
Yeah.
working in some sort of ballpark.
Yeah.
But diarizing and getting familiar with what you're having and therefore realizing, oh, actually, I thought I wasn't snacking between breakfast and lunch, but I'm having a bit of my kids' morning tea and I'm having a bit of the scraps from the lunch that I made for their lunchbox. And I've
Yeah.
walked past the cupboard and had a few almonds. Or after dinner, as I was cleaning up, I ate the leftovers from my child's plate,
Yeah.
or I went back for seconds. There's all of these little possible places that extra energy could be coming in. And there was even research looking at dietitians, so you'd expect those to be the most across the calorie content of their diet, showing that even when dietitians tracked their energy intake, they were out by 15%. So that's what I mean. Like, it's not, if you're over consuming, it doesn't mean you're gluttonous. It just means that you're probably not very in touch with what you're having.
Yeah.
Putting your good quality extra virgin olive oil on a salad, but have no idea how much you're putting on. So
Yeah.
if you're putting on a teaspoon, actually you're putting on a tablespoon, and that has a big impact on the amount of energy that you're consuming. And you can eat too much of a good thing. Like, that
Yeah.
is possible. Maybe not lettuce and kale. I should
Yeah.
reframe it. But you can certainly eat too much protein. It's hard to do, but you can do it. You can eat
Yep.
too much carbohydrate outside of non-starchy vegetables, and you can eat too much fat. They will impact your metabolic health, and the evidence suggests they're probably the biggest impactors. That is the biggest impact on poor metabolic health, is just overnutrition. More than what
Yeah.
your body can deal with at any given time. I really hate the simplification of that catchphrase that we use, like it's calories in versus
I was
calories
gonna
out.
say that. Yep. Yep.
Like, it is, we can't consume more calories than we burn and
Mm-hmm.
expect to lose weight. But there are so many factors that influence calories in and calories out. Like, I've
Yeah.
just talked about things like food labels legally being allowed to be 20% out, and that impacts how we measure the calories coming in.
Yep.
Similarly, the calories outside, before I talked to you about total daily energy expenditure and all of the things that impact that, if we have poor mitochondrial health, for example, it might impact our basal metabolic rate, which will impact energy that we burn. If we have thyroid issues, that might decrease our basal
Yep.
metabolic. And that impacts the amount of energy that we burn. So it's not just, eat less and move more, and that's the calories in, calories out. There's so much more than just what we eat and how much we move
Yeah.
that impacts the calories in versus calorie out.
Look, and that was something which I really wanted to touch on, and I'm so glad that you did because, people like you need to hear this, and you've heard it from Ellie that like it's if you're feeling like the calories out's not working for you, it's not that you're doing something wrong necessarily, but there's just so much more that needs to be understood and that goes into it. It's oversimplified and there's just, you can tell how complex we are. So if that approach isn't working for you, you're not broken, you're not stuck where you are. There just needs to be a level of understanding and refinement to
Yeah,
actually what is happening.
yeah,
Um,
exactly.
I love that. And I hope that gives people a sense of hope that there's something they can do. Because I have struggled with weight, being on the opposite to you, where I felt like I've had to lose weight. And I resonate with people being like, I'm going to be fat forever, or I'm just going to be bigger than what I'd like to be forever. And when you understand that there's more to it, that's empowering, that there's things that you can do. And there's labs that can also validate your feeling. And you can see that your insulin's too. You see your thyroid's out. Like they actually help. Yeah, they really do help in that mindset.
Yeah, they help you to understand that it's not just you eating too much and not doing enough, that there's
Mm,
there's stuff that you need to um, target as part of your weight loss strategy.
yeah.
A strategy being something way more than just like, I'm going to stop eating gluten and exercise 3 times a week. It's a
Mm.
strategy, but it's not really in depth.
Bit superficial.
The other thing that I think is really important for people to understand is that there is a difference between the aesthetic weight loss and then the weight loss that is really necessary for your like quality of life and longevity. And
Yeah.
that's why I like doing the pathology, to actually understand like what risk is your excess weight posing,
Mm,
elevated insulin, therefore risk of metabolic complications, or are we looking at dyslipidemia and risk of cardiovascular disease? I love doing waist circumference measurements because we know that above 80 centimeters for a female at that narrowest point of the waist is going to increase the risk of metabolic complications in
mm.
future. I love doing that waist circumference measurement because it helps us to see, okay, what are we dealing with here? Are we looking at weight as being a real risk to you and your longevity and quality of life? If so, we have to nail this. Like, we have to get on top of it.
Yes. Yeah.
Are we looking at purely aesthetic weight loss and like long-term prevention? Okay, great. Well, let's not put so much pressure on it. It's not the be all and end all.
Mm.
We don't want people getting unnecessarily obsessive. We want to teach people to, at this point, to really love their body and honor their body. Yes. And actually, the same should go for the people with a waist above 80 centimeters. But
Yes.
for the people where it's just purely aesthetic, it's like, okay, let's learn to love and celebrate and acknowledge our body regardless of weight.
Yeah. Yeah. It's about, by the sounds of it, just being kind
Yeah.
and to yourself wherever you are. There are different reasons people want to change their weight. Some are health driven and some are, there are other reasons for it, and that's fine. But I guess, like you said, there also needs to be that message of self-love, in that process as well, because our body is actually doing exactly, it is performing and behaving in a way in responding to the environment that we've given it. So it's actually been it's been perfect for what
Yeah.
we've been doing up to this point. It hasn't let us down. It's literally been, been functioning in the ways that in the environment that we've provided, but it's just now we want to change that environment because we want our body to behave differently.
Yeah.
If somebody has a metabolic issue, assumes, thinks like, and they wanted to do something now, today, like what would be your advice to them?
Where to begin? I think getting really in touch with um, what it means to you is
Mm,
probably the most important thing. So, like, you assume you have a metabolic issue, like, why does that concern you? Is it because you are concerned about your quality of life? Is it because you're concerned about the length of life? Is it because you want to be able to show up for your family in the best way possible rather than feeling like you're dragging your heels every single day? Is it because you want to feel more comfortable in your clothes? And the reason I say getting in touch with why it's important to you is because we know from the research that intrinsic motivation and this driver to work on things because of your own personal desire and need is more likely to keep you going. So when
mm,
things get hard and you don't want to stick to a plan, even if it's a holistic plan, you just want to revert back to your default behaviors. When things get hard, you need to drive on that intrinsic motivation. So, like, why is this important to me?
yeah.
Without it sounding too fluffy, that's actually the first thing I would say to someone, like, get someone to do, is to really acknowledge why it's important to them and get them further along that behavior change
Mm,
model. So rather than just thinking like, I've got a metabolic health issue, like actually understanding like why is that important to them. And this is where things like pathology can become really helpful because it can paint a greater picture of perhaps how progressed your metabolic issues are and how much closer you are to the risk of things like type 2 diabetes and cardiovascular disease or even Alzheimer's.
mm,
So getting really clear on that why, and then after doing that, I would consider getting in touch with what you're eating. So doing a food diary and really just acknowledging what is coming in.
yeah.
Even doing something as simple as a food diary is going to cause change in how somebody eats. It really will.
Yeah. Says the
And
awareness.
it's just the awareness piece. Yep.
Yeah.
I'm going for my fourth teaspoon of peanut butter this morning, which I thought was nothing, but I really don't want to write it down. So I've
Yeah.
given peanut butter.
Yeah. It's funny how that actually like, and I guess in some ways that's why doing diet diaries can often not reflect the truth because it is actually a deterrent. But if you want more awareness around it, it's the best way to do it. Because you're like, I don't want to write that down. I don't want to know that, like it actually works for you in that way as
Yeah,
well.
yeah. So once
Mm.
you know why it's important to you, once you know more about what's going on inside your body and what's coming inside your body, and you really want to do something about it, I think getting support is really important. Obviously, I work with people one on
Yeah, I was going to say
one.
tell people because like I would be surprised if someone wasn't thinking I want to take this to the next step and I do want that one-on-one holistic support and that real assessment of literally everything I've spoken about. So working with you, like how do people do that?
Yeah. And like I can explain how to do that, but the reason it is important is because,
Mm,
well, there's a number of reasons, but we also know from the research from people that have successfully lost weight and kept it off long term is not only do they have that internal driver to achieve and maintain that intrinsic motivation, but they've
mm.
also got accountability. So
Yeah.
they've got someone that they're talking to regularly, who they know is providing guidance and direction. So there's a strong amount of accountability. And then there's also what's called the Hawthorne effect, which is just when you think someone's looking at what you're eating, you behave differently. And if
Yeah.
that's what's required to get initial behavior change whilst you're creating these new habits, like that's a great thing.
Yeah.
Because maintaining weight loss, we all know what it is to firstly lose the weight. And then it's like, oh, how do I keep the weight off?
Yeah.
You've got to maintain the habits.
Yeah.
You can't think like I'm on a diet and I'm going to do it for the next 3 months or until I achieve my weight goal. You have to
Mm,
think, I am going to be the person who is 10 kilos lighter. And what does it take for me to be that person? Well, I have to do the shopping, do the food prep, make these meals, do this movement, get this amount of sleep, do these annual bloods. Like you have to keep doing that forever. Um,
sustainability but
yeah,
like I feel like that's exact like gut health is no different. It is about what can you do on an ongoing basis that is sustainable, that is
maintain
in alignment with the results that you want. And if
it.
that is maintaining weight, then there are things you have to do that. If you're maintaining your gut health, you have to do things to do that. You can't revert back to what put you in that position in the first place. So
Exactly.
yeah,
It's like having a garden. Like you build a new garden and then you think, oh, my garden will just sit there and look beautiful forever. It's like, actually, no, you got to keep
go and get weeds.
fertilizer on and prune it and water it and do all of that stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah, I love to work with people through the behavior change process where they're really creating these new behaviors and, you know, creating every chance of them then maintaining these behaviors. And then obviously I love helping them to delve more deeply into what's going on for their body so we can really tailor the diet and the approach for them, because the reality is that there are a ton of different ways that somebody can lose weight, but what is going to be most appropriate for them and their lifestyle, their history, their preferences, is what I love to do rather than, apply a cookie cutter approach. It's like,
Yeah,
okay, how can we really tailor this for you and your needs?
yeah.
I have a program called Mind Body Makeover, which is a one-on-one program. It's a 4-month program, but a lot of my clients will work with me for a lot longer than that, through
Mm.
that process. And sometimes it takes longer to establish the behavior change. And people can learn more about it through my website, which is nutritionally.com. Or they can stalk me on Instagram, which is nutritionally.
And we will have those links in the show notes so people can reach out to you and, work towards their goals with obviously someone as knowledgeable and as experienced and as holistic as yourself. So we'll put them in the show notes. Check them out. Elly, thank you so much for this incredible talk. I just could have kept speaking. There's things that we didn't touch on, which I'm like, we should have asked that,
What to?
like exactly, we'll have to have you back. Oh dear, to cover all those things. But thank you so much. It's been incredible.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for tuning into Gutsy Talks. I hope today's episode left you feeling inspired to take the next step in your gut health journey. If you're ready to dive deeper, head over to rachellarson.com.au. There's a range of courses and resources waiting for you. If you loved this episode, I'd be so grateful if you shared it with others who might benefit from this information. And so you don't miss out on future Gutsy Talks, be sure to hit follow and leave a review. I'd love to hear your feedback. I'm Rachel Larson, and I can't wait to connect with you again for our next Gutsy Talk.